Flowers die, side of sky. I'm just looking outside. This is easy.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Firstly, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, retweeted, all that kind of stuff. Certainly a big thank you to Henston for retweeting one's tweet and enjoying the review of their whiskies. So yeah, everything's absolutely hunky-dory. So this week, as you can see from the title page, it's a Japanese episode of the show, which is a bit of a rarity, to be honest with you. I think this is only, the fourth, maybe the fifth possible episode that I've wholly done on Japanese whiskey. The samples just don't come my way. So before we go any further, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Alicia at Love Drinks for the Kurayoshi Distillery samples, and to friends in Sunderland and Christopher Canning for the Kanosuke samples. Yes, as you can see, lots of foreign words that I'm going to absolutely murder the pronunciation with, so bear with me on those, because there's a fair few of them. Anyway, so Japanese whiskey. These two particular distilleries are quite interesting in they're part of, I suppose, what they're calling the new wave of Japanese whiskey making. Sounds a bit like New Bourbon, doesn't it? You know, the new wave of British heavy metal. Well, that was back in the 80s anyway. So yeah, it's basically you've got all these new distilleries that have been cropping up over time. You know, to make a splash on the world stage, I suppose. And to show that Japanese whiskey is not just about the big two, basically. Of course, the downside is with Japanese whiskies, they're just, or the single malts anyway, are just so ridiculously expensive these days. I mean, yes, partly it's down to the big two hiking the prices some years ago to slow the market down, but it's now basically the situation where I guess you've got these new distilleries, they're looking at what the general market pricing for Japanese whiskies are, and they're pricing accordingly. I mean, it's not a new thing. I know it happens all over the world. I've had conversations with reps from various distilleries and producers who have said, price rises are not only because of the increase in raw materials and so on and so forth. There's a lot of looking at what sort of similar distilleries are pricing their whiskies at, and they want to be seen to be priced accordingly, and sometimes that means big price increase, which is ridiculous, really. At the end of the day, if they were quite happy selling or having their whiskey sold at £10-15 a bottle cheaper than the neighbour, but then suddenly decide that obviously that makes them look inferior, so therefore they've got to put the price up. It's just basically blatant profiteering, really, at the end of the day, isn't it? If you were comfortable making a certain profit margin and then suddenly, you decide, well, I'm going to make more, it is profiteering. But anyway, that's the thing is there's such a great variety of whiskies available on the market now, all sorts of various price points. So, if you don't want to spend three figures on a bottle of whiskey, great, there are other options. All right, those options may well be shrinking the further you get back down the line, but there are still some good options in my opinion. But anyway, enough of that. Let's talk Japan. So like I said, we have two distilleries that I'm looking at today, Kurayoshi and Kanosuke. So Kurayoshi is a small distillery. It's located at the foot of Mount Daisen in the Tottori prefecture, and it's owned by the Matsui Shuzo brewery. So although this is not a new distillery per se, the company or the brewery has been in existence since 1910, but prior to that, or prior to 2017 I should say, they imported whiskey and then bottled it, aged it for a while in Japan, bottled it in Japan, and oh look, it's Japanese whiskey. I mean, yeah, okay, we know this kind of goes on, and most of it was for the local market. It's no different, I suppose, from sort of India, really, and their whiskey in inverted commas, which is all made from molasses. It's for the local market. Nobody really cares. They want cheap whiskey in inverted commas. It's when it gets shipped over to the UK, it's sort of kind of like, you know, this is where we get into a bit of a grey area, and why I think that legislation really should be passed in Japan to basically split the two things, you know, to say, right, this is Japanese produced whiskey, but this is Japanese bottled whiskey. I don't think, personally, I can't see a problem with that. I think, you know, as long as the juice in the bottle is good, yeah, it doesn't matter what it's called really at the end of the day, but it just gives you a little bit more clarity as to what is going on. Anyway, so Kurayoshi decided, for whatever the reason, and here we have a nice kind of symbiosis between the two distilleries, because both distilleries decided not to go with the standard 2 still setup, but they went for 3 stills. Obviously it gives you, you know, a lot of flexibility. One assumes that both distilleries have 1 wash, 2 spirit, or possibly a wash, spirit and an intermediate still, and certainly if you look at the stills at Kanosuke, they're all different sized and different shapes, different linarms and all that kind of thing. And I think, now I could well be wrong here, but I think both distilleries used worm tubs, because I believe worm tubs are more historic in the making of shoshu, and certainly Kurayoshi has its history in the making of shoshu. But yeah, so they put in these 3 new pot stills in 2017 and started distilling their own spirits. So they do a range of both single malts and blends, and again, I don't know exactly the makeup of the blend, whether that does contain some non-Japanese whiskey or not. Couldn't tell you, but we'll obviously see what the spirit is like, because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Anyway, so Kanosuke was founded on the southwest coast of Kyushu Island, near the city of Kagoshima. Oh, cool! We're on a bit of a roll here. And again, area is well known for producing sake and shoshu. And the founder of the distillery was a chap called Yoshiguro Komasa. And he named the distillery after his grandfather. And again, like I said, they've gone down a very similar route to Kurayoshi, in that they have 3 stills. Now the interesting thing where they differ is in their use of oak. Kurayoshi tend to use pretty much, well, they use, I would imagine, ex-American oak, but they also use Mizunara and what they call Sakura, which is cherry wood. Interesting, and be interesting to see how much influence that particular type of wood has on the spirit. Certainly, as we well know, Mizunara has a distinct character of its own right, and so it'll be interesting to see what the cherry wood one is like. Kanosuke is slightly different in that they do use ex-American oak and ex-sherry casks, but they also have a tendency to use ex-shoshu casks as well. And certainly the Thompson Brothers single cask bottling is interesting, because it was originally, the spirit was originally put into an ex-shoshu cask before then being re-racked into ex-bourbon. Whereas I don't know quite what the makeup of the sort of distillery bottling is. It just said a variety of casks, so it's probably a batch bottling. Anyway, if you want any more information, obviously there are links to the individual distilleries in the box below, but I think it's just time to take a look at today's lineup. Okay, so we're going to kick off with 2 blended whiskies. I'm assuming a proper blend, malt and grain. The first one is called the Tottori blend, bottled at 43%, and it is a blend of 3 Japanese whiskies aged in ex-American oak. Doesn't say how long for, but and I don't know whether they produce all of the whiskey themselves or whether they source some from other Japanese distilleries. So all I know is it is made from Japanese whiskey. The second sample we're looking at is called the Tottori blend Bourbon barrel, and as you can see, quite a distinctly darker colour, so we're probably looking at maybe more first fill American oak or more active cask. Certainly, again, it's a blend of 3 Japanese whiskies that have been aged for a minimum of 3 years. Then we're going to move on to the 2 Kanosuke bottlings. This is the limited edition 2022 release. It's bottled at 59%. And again, it's a minimum of 3 years of age, and like I said, aged in a variety of casks, including ex-Shoshu, so it could have ex-Bourbon, could have some sherry in it. It will be interesting to see. Now, this is where it all starts to get a little bit expensive, because this is obviously available through the Whisky Exchange. Looks like they have the, well, I don't know whether they have the exclusivity for it, but certainly they seem to be making a big thing about it, and it's 150 quid a bottle, so it'd be interesting to see, you know, is a 3-year-old whiskey really worth 150 quid? Right, okay, then on to the second of the 2 Kanosuke bottlings. This is the first independent bottling from that distillery by the Thompson Brothers. So it's a single cask, 20463, and like I said at the beginning, originally aged in an ex-Shoshu cask before it re-racked into an ex-Bourbon. Obviously bottled this last year as well, so this time 4 years old, so we'll see what an extra year does on with regards to the maturity of the whisky. Then we're coming back to Kurayoshi. So these are the 2 single malts they do. It's called the Matsui single malt. This is the Sakura cask. Bottled at 48%. Hallelujah, about bloody time it was bottled at something above 43% and non-chill filtered, one would imagine. So like I said, aged in, I don't know if it's wholly aged in ex-cherry wood casks, or whether it's aged in American oak and then back into that. Absolutely no idea. All I know is that it's, again, retails at a price around about the price of the Kanosuke, 140 quid. So again, is it really worth it? And the final bottling of the day is the Matsui single malt Mizunara cask, again bottled at 48%. Similar price tag, 135, 140 quid. One imagines, again, fairly young whiskey, if it obviously being their single malt. Obviously, consider it, you can do the maths. They started in 2017, so yeah. Anyway. So that's today's lineup. Really looking forward to this. So let's kick off with the 2 blendings then. Right, okay, so this is the Tottori blend, 43%. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? It's fresh, it's citric, it's quite barleyed. It's got a nice freshness to it. The oak is a bit chunky, but it's kind of well sort of back in the aromas. It's sort of sitting in the background, as I kind of expected. Looking at the colour of it, I wasn't expecting a sort of an avalanche of vanilla. It's a bit young. It's a little raw, possibly. There's some nice green fruit notes coming through. It's got a very Spey-like character. It's an easy-going whiskey, and you know, $47.95. You could get an awful lot worse. See what the parts are. Sweet barley, touch of honey. Got quite a grainy intensity, almost kind of grainy minerals. Has a nice kind of intensity on the mid palate. It's a bit short. It kind of tails off pretty quickly. It's got a pleasant citric aftertaste, I have to say. It's not sort of majorly complex. And you could argue, well, you know, $47.95 for a not particularly complex whiskey. But this is where we're at. So it's not too bad at all at the end of the day. It's obviously well made. Like I said, a bit short, but you know, it's pleasant. Okay, so let's move on to the Tottori Bourbon barrel. Let's see what the nose gives us in this, shall we? Bourbon. It just reeks of American oak. It's that sweet corn, fat, vanilla, toffee, a little bit of burnt caramel. I don't get any spirit character whatsoever. I mean, it's just, you know, I mean, it's exactly. You could have just aged this in sherry casks at the end of the day. To me, it doesn't. This is a classic example of I like whiskey that's been aged in American oak, but you know, I don't want to just smell American oak. To me, this is utterly unbalanced. All it is just oak. I mean, there's no spirit character whatsoever. No, I can't get even an inkling of spirit character. It is just all vanilla, burnt caramel, toffee, corn. Let's see if there's more balance on the palate. No. Is the honest answer. It's an oak overkill again. I mean, you could put that in a flight of bourbons and people wouldn't have, you'd think bourbon, because it just tastes like vanilla again, the sort of like the toffee, the burnt corn, the burnt caramel. No, I mean, there's not even any spirit on the finish. I mean, you know, it's all very clean. It's very nice. It's pleasant. If you like this kind of style, if you like big oak monsters, you'll love it. But to me, there's no light and shade there. I mean, it could come from anywhere in the world. It has no character other than the character of the oak, and for me, that really is just totally unbalanced. Right, okay, so let's move on to the distillery bottling of Kanosuke. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, there's a pleasant nose. It's quite fresh. It's citric, but there is a density there. There's a density of oak, some white peach, apple, vanilla. Definitely getting that sort of rice starch shochu-y kind of note coming through. It's quite delicate, quite elegant. There's a little bit of a sort of an almost kind of apple blossom note coming through. There's a little bit of malt underlying it. It's got a bit of weight, but it is quite elegant and delicate. It's not, again, a really complex nose. I mean, this is only 3 years old, and the spirit character is obviously there, and it is very light, and it's elegant, it's slightly floral, and it's delicate. And there's some nice unobtrusive oak, a touch of shochu notes. I mean, but is it really worth 150 quid? That's what I'm kind of grappling with here. Yes, it's nice, but, you know, there's always that but. Anyway, let's see what the parts are. A bit more fuller on the palate, a little bit more oilier, richer, denser, more apricot, fleshy apricot, some lovely appley notes, barley, apple blossom, a little bit more oak as well, a little bit more oak vanilla. Again, getting that sort of shochu-y kind of rice starch kind of note coming through, some nice maltiness, good length. I mean, 59%, but it really doesn't sort of like, you know, mask the finish too much. Yeah, sure, you can taste the fact that it's a high ABV. Yeah, again, it's a pleasant whiskey, but you know, is it really worth 150 quid at the end of the day? Why is, and you sort of like, you know, go, why? Surely, yeah. Anyway, but let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Lighter, more grassy, more citric, nicely fragrant, still bit simpler, certainly showing its youth, shall we say. You can smell that it's a young spirit. It's not raw spirit, it's young spirit. It's got a pleasant sort of almost orange character coming through now, and a little bit of honey. I mean, it's a nice nose. Let's see what the parts like. Softer, simpler, still relatively weighty, honeyed, a little bit more of that orange note coming through. Definite sort of almost kind of like white grape note on the mid palate. I mean, it's got again pleasant length. It's okay. Again, I don't really think it's worth 150 quid, but it's interesting. And so if you're prepared to spend 150 quid for interesting, then fine.
Get revenge, not think about what happened.
Okay, so let's move on to the Thompson Brothers Kanosuke. So let's see if an extra year does anything to the nose. Deeper, more intense. I don't know whether it's showing a bit more age. Doesn't really feel that much. I mean, a lot of oak. It's got a real grippiness to it. Certainly, again, the shoshu rice starch note is there. Apricot, oxidised apple, marzipan, rice wine vinegar. More intense, more complex. Now I can't remember how much Chris said that he paid for this particular bottle, but I've seen it online for 225 quid. Yeah, 225 quid. It's got more intensity, it's got more depth, more interest, more complexity than the distillery bottling, it has to be said. And although it's bottled at 58%, but you can smell the alcohol. Again, the alcohol is really, really well contained. But yeah, that's got a damn sight more intensity. Let's see what the parts like. Rich, dense, heavy, apricot, charred oak, barley, apple blossom, again, white grape, again that sort of rice starchy shoshu note coming through on the mid palate, oxidised fruit, greenwood, citrus. That is really quite complex, and tasting that after the distillery bottling, it tastes like a component part, if you see what I mean. I can see the echoes of this particular cask in the previous bottling, but it seems to have been watered down, essentially. It's basically they've used a number of other casks and it's kind of watered down this intensity of character. Slightly sappy, oily, lovely kind of almost cognac dried fruits kind of aftertaste. I'm going to put a little drop of water with it to see what that does to it. I mean, that's impressive. I mean, so it just goes to show the distillery is producing impressive quality whiskey, but when they start vatting it all together, something seems to get lost in translation, I think. It is a little bit soapy now, simpler, more of that kind of shoshu oxidised fruit kind of character. Bit buttery. I mean, it's a pleasant nose. I think I prefer it without sort of dilution. So I'll pass on that. Very much similar to as it was neat. I mean, it's a little bit longer, possibly a little softer. Obviously, not so much in alcohol on the palate now. But like I said, when it was neat, I don't think that alcohol was intrusive. It was really well contained. Nice pepperiness now, and again, I'm getting that distinct sort of oxidised, almost cognac-esque kind of character. I mean, that is a stunning cask. It's and a stunning whiskey, it has to be said. 225 quid. Well, that's today's market, isn't it? And I much prefer that to the sort of the distillery bottling, it has to be said. Okay, so let's move on to the Sakura cask. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? It's youthful. There's a bit of an alcohol prickle, even though it's only 48%. Barley, white fruits, apple, honey, little bit on the almost estery side. I wouldn't go as far as saying overly estery, but there's an element of fruit esters there. A little bit of green apple. Again, there's a little bit of a faint note coming through, which, like I said, is showing the fact that this is pretty useful. I mean, again, it can't physically be any older than, well, 4. Realistically, I think I got the samples. I got samples earlier this year. Possibly could be 5 years old at the very push, but I'm reckoning 3 to 4 years old. And again, 140 quid for this. I mean, it's not bad whiskey. It's just very young whiskey. I'm not getting a great deal from the cask either. I was expecting something intriguing from the cherry blossom oak, but or the cherry wood, I should say. But I'm not really getting a great deal of, a little bit of vanilla possibly, but I'm not getting anything different. Shall we say? Maybe just cherry wood needs more time to bring out. I don't know. Is it is it sort of more closer grained? I have absolutely no idea. And it just takes that little bit more time to sort of release its character. I mean, like I said, pleasant nose. Sort of pass on. Oily, young, slightly fainty. Some lightly coffee tannins, a bit short, I will say. There's some nice white fruits. It's kind of, it's got a semblance of lightly estery fruit, a little bit of apple, peach, that kind of thing. But it just feels like it hasn't really kind of developed yet. Yes, it's interesting to look at spirit and sort of gauge its kind of evolution, I suppose, but when you're being asked to fork out 135, 140 quid, you really want the finished product at the end of the day, I think. Well, I would anyway. And yes, this is interesting. If this was 50 quid, I would go, yeah, absolutely wonderful. You know, great value for money, interesting to look at a new distillery, etc., etc. But it's just sort of, it's just way too overpriced. Yes, you can argue that obviously getting the stuff over into the UK, transportation charges and all that kind of stuff, a lot more than, you know, shipping it from, you know, Aberdeen, for argument's sake. But even so, sort of factoring all that in, it's just sort of, I just think, just too expensive. Okay, so let's move on to the final bottling of the afternoon, the Mizunara cask. Let's see what the nose gives on this end, shall we? Again, light, slightly soapy, chamomile, lime blossom, barley. It's got that noticeable, or to me, noticeable sappy Mizunara oak character, a little bit of spice, but you can say exactly the same thing about this as you could about the Sakura cask. It's just young, and it really hasn't sort of developed anything yet. I mean, it's well, developed a bit. I mean, that's a bit of a dumb thing to say, but you know, you know what I mean. It's a little bit thin as well. I would expect a little bit more sort of, you know, body to it, or certainly more depth to the aromas. But sort of pass on. It's a bit thin again on the palate, indistinct, white fruits. Again, some nice sappy Mizunara oak comes through on the mid palate. A little bit of fleshy apricot, some vanilla. it kind of tries to sort of bolster the mid palate, and then but it falls away really quickly. And again, this is just very indicative of young spirit. Young spirit just does not have the complexity or the length. It often just falls away really quickly. And again, I just have to question the price. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with the quality. It's just, I think that it's just ridiculously overpriced. And although, and all these comments that I make in today's episode are holding my own and obviously have no bearing or relevance to the company that employs me, if I was to, you know, to try and sell this, how could I? I don't believe in it. I don't think it's worth what I would have to sell it for at the end of the day. And that's one of the main questions I always ask myself after I've tasted a whiskey is, you know, how much do I have to sell that for if I was a retailer? And do I think I would be comfortable in doing that? And if the answer is no, then, well, there are other whiskies. And, you know, it's harsh, but I think it's a kind of, you know, a fair appraisal at the end of the day. Okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Firstly, a big thank you to Alicia at Love Drinks, Ian and Chris for the other two samples for today's episode of the show. Obviously, without your continued support, there wouldn't be an episode of the show. And I kind of feel I've been maybe unduly harsh, but I think I've been fair in my appraisal. Certainly, I thought the blend was pleasant. In actual fact, I thought it was probably of the two blends, the Bourbon and the standard blend, I much preferred the standard blend. The Bourbon cask blend was just one-dimensional. It was all American oak, no other character. At least the entry level, and that was it. You know, that was it. People seem to think sort of entry level, no, you know, reused cask, cheap and cheerful, all that kind of stuff. Well, cheap and cheerful, relatively speaking. And then, but in actual fact, by using refill casks, you're getting the character of the spirit. You know, it's just kind of, this is what I want. Now, if this has been replicated in the Bourbon with maybe a little bit more American oak character, a little bit more depth, I'd have probably said, yeah, great. But the fact was, it was just, the spirit was just swamped by the American oak. The Kanosuke Distillery bottling, the limited edition 2002, yeah, pleasant whiskey. It's going to be interesting to see how it develops and where it goes. It needs more flesh on its bones. It needs more time. And the interesting thing is that from tasting the single cask, the Thompson Brothers single cask, they are producing some stunning whiskey, it has to be said. But it's something is getting lost in the vatting of the casks together. I don't know how many casks were vatted together for this particular bottling, but you know, like I said, it just seemed to me that there was something missing there. For, like I said, for 150 quid, you kind of really want more for your money, I think, personally. The Sakura cask, I was intrigued to see that, to taste that. Again, you know, young spirit, just hadn't, you know, developed enough character, didn't really get anything much from the cherry cask. I personally don't think I've ever had a cherry cask matured whiskey, so I had no kind of benchmark. I didn't know quite what to expect, and really it didn't really say anything at all. I mean, the Mizunara cask, or at least I could pick up the Mizunara notes. I could tell that had been aged in a Mizunara cask, but again, the spirit was too young. It had no real length, it had no depth. It just wasn't ready for bottling, and this is always the thing with whiskey. Bottle it when it's ready rather than when it's commercially viable. You know, that's the thing at the end of the day. And you know, I don't think any distillery kind of attempts to sort of like pull the wool over your eyes, but I think that there are commercial reasons for releasing stuff that overweigh and the you know, if you had the luxury of basically waiting forever and a day until your stuff was, you know, à point, as they say, then you probably lost money and you'd be going out of business, I suppose. But you know, when you're asking premium money, it's got to be worth premium money, in my personal opinion, and I don't think they were actually worth what I would have to retail them for. So, although not bad whiskies, just not really worth it, I think. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. Like I said, it's been an interesting episode, I think, quite an eye-opener, and So all that's really left to say is until next week, good dramming, good afternoon.